With the best brand of football in Idaho, this is the 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
Hey, that's right. Welcome in. It is another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com. Brandon Bainey with the coach, Lane Kirkland, and the Idaho 8-Man Twitter master extraordinaire, Will Henneke. No time for pleasantries because, Coach Kirkland, you've got 19% battery on your phone and no charger, so you might just drop out in the middle of the show, and that's it.
It can happen. Yeah, just like it's time to go to bed here at 10 o'clock, maybe.
Yeah. All right. Will, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay, well, let's get right to it then. The Idaho 8-Man Prepcast, of course, always starts with our game of the week, and we're going to your neck of the woods, Coach Kirkland. District 4, 1A D1, Snake River Conference, Murtaugh and Valley. This was a back-and-forth affair. Murtaugh hangs on to win 62-58. Coach Kirkland, I'm guessing it probably came down to a couple of 2-point conversions. It looks like maybe Murtaugh cashed in a few more than Valley.
Yeah, and I think I also heard it came down to the last possession, which it would in that sort of a game as well. But those extra points count, and you got to have all of them when it's back and forth. And man, you're on your toes, and you know you're going to score. And the biggest question on the sideline to the coach is, "What's our extra point, coach? What can we get there?" So. Lots of good calls made there, and that's a lot of points and some good teams that are improving every week.
Yeah, I mean, for Murtaugh in the win, we know they love to run the ball. Eli Merrick, 183 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. Junior Benitez adds 176 yards and 2 scores. Sawyer Young throws for 135 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Benitez caught one, Merrick caught the other. How about defensively? 16 tackles for Junior Benitez on defense with an interception. I asked you this last week, Coach Kirkland. What's more impressive, what Junior Benitez did on offense or the 16 tackles and the pick he had on defense?
Well, it tells you he's got a lot of miles in that night from sideline to sideline. Both valiant efforts. Apparently it's offense because they won.
Yes. And then, Will, on the Valley side, we've talked about Josh Hardy a lot, this dual threat quarterback for Valley. He had a nice night passing, 12 of 19, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. But how about the rushing totals? 30 carries, 285 yards, 5 touchdowns. True dual threat quarterback.
Yeah, he's a nice little version of his older brother, who we've talked about on this podcast before. And the Vikings have some nice weapons, and coming into the year, I don't know how many people thought we'd be sitting here at the midway point of the season saying that, Valley might be in the driver's seat for an at-large berth into the 1A Division I playoffs. But, even though they lost, it was a good team. It was a strong game. I think they've put themselves in a pretty good position to make a real strong playoff push.
And on the other side, this was obviously an important win for Murtaugh as well, because the league is going to be so close and competitive this year. Anytime you can get the W, doesn't matter if it was only by 4 points, doesn't matter if you got into a shootout, Murtaugh will definitely take that win. Both teams are now 1-1 in league play. Murtaugh's 3-1 overall. Valley is 2-2, and this is a game, Will, I think we'll look back on and say, yeah, that had major playoff implications.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it could be the difference between being somewhere in that 6 to 8 range and maybe being a 10 or an 11. And that could potentially be the difference between playing at home or having to take a real long bus ride. And we know that in November, that makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Elsewhere in the Snake River Conference this past week, Oakley and Rath River played on IdahoSports.com. Oakley kind of pulled away in the second and third quarters to earn the win there. So Rath River remains winless in league play, but they've got the 2 most difficult out of the way, Oakley and Lighthouse Christian, check and check. Speaking of Lighthouse Christian, the Lions get a very narrow win over Cary. Coach Kirkland, you were at this game. Lighthouse Christian was up 30-12 at halftime. Cary pitches a second half shutout and nearly completes the comeback.
Yeah, it was a competitive ball game. It swung a different direction the second half for sure. I know Lighthouse first 2 scores were on some missed coverage and both on 4th downs, by the way. And we went for a punt on our own 30 and didn't connect that. So that was another touchdown on Lighthouse side. So really a pretty even game outside of those 3 plays in the first half, and then second half. Our boys came out and played an aggressive defense, causing a lot of turnovers, really getting after Schrader in De Jong's face one-on-one the whole night, and really had a good showing and demonstrated a lot of good improvement. And on a Lighthouse team that's very talented, they sealed the deal pretty much with first downs and runoffs, with running the ball and finishing the Panthers off at home. So a good effort by the Panthers.
Coach, over the summer, I had people telling me, and you would know this better than anybody, being there and knowing these kids the way you do, that Carey was most likely going to be a much different team in October than they were September, just because of the gained experience and the gained repetitions. A lot of kids stepping into roles that they haven't been in before. Is that what you're seeing, looking at them and watching them play?
Yeah, they definitely began to show up there and gain some reps, those first few games, and some confidence. And anytime Carey plays Lighthouse, it's going to be a death match. And it was a good battle between both teams. And I think a confidence builder for Carey in the future.
Yeah, on our Magic Valley Prepcast, where we just talk about District 4 athletics, Scott Burton had a chance to talk to Logan Bosma, the head coach at Lighthouse. He said game ball goes to Colin Vanderham, who basically made the reception that got Lighthouse the last first down they needed to run out the clock. Basically, otherwise they were going to give the ball back to Carey. So Colin Vanderham came up with a big reception to basically end the game. And then another fun tidbit we learned is that Coach Bosma and some of the other assistants are young enough and spry enough that they actually hop in and play on the scout team a little bit against these varsity players.
Good
and so they have a lot of fun. If a kid picks off Coach Bosma as he's throwing a pass on the scout team, they let him know about it too. So it's cool that the coaches can mix it up like that.
Whereas if I kind of catch my shoulder on a door walking into a room and it kind of tweaks me a little bit, I'm on the shelf for like a week. So I'm glad to hear that those guys are able to get in there and still compete.
You ever do that, Coach Kirkland? Hop in there on the scout team?
As often as I could. Yeah, you bet.
What position would you play?
I was always the scout quarterback.
Yeah.
100% completion percentage, right?
Yeah, sometimes those other guys. But, I got a few rips in my shirts and toe stepped on over the years, so I quit doing that after a bit.
You ended up on the injured list too much. So congrats to Lighthouse Christian and for Carey to come up 2 points short. I think this is a game they're going to look back on and go, this was a big building block as they continue to build. So we talked about Oakley and Raft River. That was on IdahoSports.com last week. We also had a non-conference battle between Grace and Notice. Grace made the long trip over to Notice. They win 48-0. Braden Kimball, who quarterbacks this Grace offense, was really effective. 2 touchdowns passing, 2 touchdowns rushing. Wyatt Cutler rushed for a touchdown, caught a touchdown pass. Joe Clegg caught a touchdown pass as well. Coach, you got to see Grace with your own eyes. This didn't surprise you, did it?
Not at all. I knew that was a much better ball club. I think Lighthouse got by Grace respectively in that particular game, and Grace didn't have their best ball game against Lighthouse. But Grace has regrouped, went on the road. That's a long trip against a good team, and they're back and rolling again, it looks like to me.
And this is another one of those games, Will, where we talk about Notice in District 3, fair or not. Every time they play somebody from another league, it's going to be used as a measuring stick, and the conference as a whole is going to be judged on this. And so for Notice to come out and fall a little bit flat, again, perception is reality. Fair or unfair, the conference is going to get dinged again.
Yeah, it's going to happen at some point, but District 3 needs to win one of these games. And it's going to happen. It may not happen this year. I think that overall the conference is down a little bit, though I think Notice has a pretty decent club. But the conference itself needs to find a big win. They need somebody to step up and beat a Butte County, to beat a Grace, to beat a Carey. If they get a matchup with Carey, they need to win one of those games and show that they belong with a seat at the big table with some of those other powerhouses.
Yeah. So congrats to Grace. They're 4-1. They're one of the few teams in Idaho that has played 5 games through 5 weeks of competition. The bye week is coming soon for the Grizz. And for Notice, they're 2-1. So they've had a couple of games get wiped out. So they're a little bit behind in terms of number of games, but I think Notice will be just fine ultimately. Another game we had on IdahoSports.com last Friday night is the game I was at, gentlemen, at the Mariman Health Core Center. It's this beautiful facility that the Coeur d'Alene Tribe Boys and Girls Club helped fund and facilitate. It's a turf field right there in Worley. Not many 8-man teams get to play on turf, and so it was kind of a cool deal. Clark Fork played Lakeside in a 1A D2 matchup. It was only 14-8 at halftime, and Clark Fork came in with the game plan of, we are going to run that sucker down. We're going to run the clock down to 1 second before every snap. It worked pretty well. They were trailing 14-8 at halftime. But then when we got to the second half, back-to-back possessions ended with defensive scores for Lakeside. And from there, Clark Fork could never catch up after that. You had a fumble return of about 55 yards by Lucky Matt, the homecoming king. He won the homecoming king at halftime. Then he gets the scoop and score. And then the next, that's a good night. And then on the next possession, Jamari Pion picked off a pass, and he took it back about 65 yards for a touchdown. And so from there, Lakeside got the win. I was very impressed with this Lakeside team, Will. I thought coming in it was going to be a track meet because they've got all these dynamic athletes, but they're physical. They line up and they run it down your throat with Quincy Hall and Pion, and even a guy like Blaze Callahan comes in off the bench. And defensively, their front six, their 3 linebackers, 3 linemen are all tough, physical, standout players. I can't wait for Lakeside to play Mullen St. Regis.
Yeah, Coach Buell told me over the summer that one of the things he was really happy about is that the physical presence that his veteran kids brought to the field. And we've talked a lot about Quincy Hall on this podcast, but Pion's a kid. He gets overlooked a little bit. All he does is go out there and, pick up a touchdown or two, pick up 50 or 60 yards on the ground. And, oh, by the way, intercept a pass or have a couple of sacks or something. He's that kind of that nice number 2 option that a good team needs. So you don't necessarily live and die with one guy, though Quincy Hall is a heck of a guy. If you're going to live and die with somebody up there in Division 1 or District 1, that's a good guy to live and die with. But they've got some bullets in the gun to work with there, and people have been saying all along, hey, don't sleep on them. Everybody assumes, Mullen Clark Fork. Don't rule out Lakeside, and I think Lakeside kind of showed us why.
Coach Kirkland, the homecoming king, Lucky Matt, he gets the defensive touchdown. He was our IdahoSports.com player of the game. How often does that happen where the homecoming king, gets crowded at halftime and then comes out that second half and makes an impact play?
You never know. They're always some of the better players on the team, but that's the icing on the cake right there. And I'm sure it made him feel pretty happy, as well as his parents and his hometown.
Yeah, I also wanted to formally put before you, we'll vote on it. We're coming up with the Idaho 8-man all-name team this year. We've already got 2 official designated slots to Crash Taylor from Castleford and Razor Duke from Butte County. I would like to submit Lucky Matt from Lakeside, because with a name like Lucky, he sure was, and just the way he played. What do you guys think? Lucky Matt, should he make the all-name team or not?
I think he's on the roster, Coach. What do you think?
You bet. Yeah, right there at the top.
All right. Lucky Matt from the Lakeside Knights, our 3rd official member of the all-name team here on the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast. And again, we'll take your submissions as well. You can send those to Brandon at IdahoSports.com if you want somebody to be nominated for the all-name team. And then real quick, just to wrap up with Clark Fork, I came in expecting to see Chase San Roman at running back. He played quarterback in the first half and ran the ball pretty well. And then in the second half, when they got behind by multiple scores and had to abandon the run game, that's when Ethan Howard came in to play quarterback, and he's, 6'3", big, tall kid. He didn't play at all in the first half. And so I just wonder what it would look like if Howard had played at quarterback the whole game and San Roman had been the running back, Will. But it's hard to just switch your game plan completely and go from run the ball, run the clock to, all right, now we're down multiple scores. We gotta try and pass.
It is. And it's hard to be that kid who's, been over holding the metaphorical clipboard for half a game and then have the coach turn to you and say, okay, go sling us back into this. And I know, Ethan Howard's he's a talented player, but that's a tall order against a good team.
And one more note about Clark Fork. They didn't punt the entire night, Coach. At one point, they had like a 4th and 30 from like their own 25, and they still didn't punt. I'd never seen that before.
It's called the Tecmo Bowl offense.
Yeah. Have you ever had a team like that where you didn't have anybody that you felt good punting back there, and you just said, we're just going to go for it on every 4th down?
No, I've never been that brave, honestly. And I've had coaches try and say, just go. What are you doing? Go for it, coach. We're not going to punt very far anyway. And I still have punted. So I'm a punter.
Scout team punter too, just like the scout team QB, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, Clark Fork will be better. I think it's ironic. Patrick Young is their coach. First year, he also played for Clark Fork from like 2006 to 2008. He was a wide receiver, and yet he comes in with this game plan of we're going to run the ball and basically bleed the clock. So I thought that was ironic as well, that a former receiver is now saying, yeah, let's ground and pound, baby. So yeah, Clark Fork will be okay, I think, moving on there. Okay. Let's talk about, this is really the meat and bones, meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about on the Prepcast this week. Will, you started hearing rumblings last week, and then it became official that the co-op of Greenleaf Friends, Centennial Baptist, and Gem State was going to dissipate and basically fold on the season. Just didn't have enough kids. They went to the IHSAA and petitioned to allow the players that were remaining from that Greenleaf Friends co-op and were still interested in playing to play with Wilder. And that went through. And so now you've got kind of this Wilder team that has also suffered a lot of injuries, and they get some reinforcements, a couple from Greenleaf, maybe one from Gem State, from Centennial Baptist. We have to wait and see what the roster shakeout is, but I'm still fairly new to Idaho. Is this something that happens a lot in the state, Will?
No. And Coach, you can speak to it more because you have a lot more 8-man experience than I do, but frankly, I was caught a little bit off guard. Not that Greenleaf and Wilder, who have co-opted before, not that they asked the question, but I was a little surprised that an in-season co-op was approved, because in talking to Coach Bailey over at Wilder, he said a couple of the kids coming over from Greenleaf are linemen, and that's an area where we're short. So I'm sure I'm sure Idaho City would like to go out and maybe add Ronaldo Gomez from Rimrock to the roster, and I'm saying that jokingly, of course. I don't mean that's the next shoe to fall, is that Idaho City and Rimrock are going to combine here. But I was a little bit surprised in the context of you're in the middle of the season. There are two teams in the same league that are competing for a playoff berth. And I get that. I get that things are what they are as far as injuries and rosters and whatnot. But them being put together and allowed to finish the season in the same division, competing for a playoff spot still, I was a little bit surprised by that. That said, I'm glad that the kids are going to get to stay on the field and finish their season, and I'm really interested to see how it works out. You're trying to, basically, I don't want to say start over from nothing, because you're not starting over from nothing, but you're integrating new players, new ideas, new coaches, new thoughts, with 3-4 weeks to go in the regular season.
Yeah, what were your thoughts on this, Coach, when you saw that this was happening?
I don't think I've ever seen it in season before that I can recall, or paid much attention to that. But I can appreciate the IHSAA and that decision, and I agree with Will that let's get those kids playing and continue their seasons, let them finish their dream out. Maybe some of those guys are seniors. And at least let them play football the rest of their high school career, finish out that senior year and be on a team and have some participation and still play the game. So
yeah, so we'll see how it goes. Wilder is a team that's taken it on the chin this year, as had Greenleaf, as has a lot of teams in that league. So we'll see how this newly formed Wilder, Greenleaf, Gem State, Centennial Baptist co-op looks. But it is interesting that in season, already with a couple of games under each team's respective belt, they go to make this move. And I guess that brings up the larger question. What do we do about those programs that are constantly struggling with numbers? We saw earlier this year, Clark County come out and say, look, we've only got 8 kids on the roster. We're going to play a 6-man schedule. Everybody in their conference said, we're good with that. When we play you, we'll play 6-man. To me, coach, it goes one of two ways. There's a 6-man division that is adopted, or we see more of these co-ops. But the impression I've gotten is that communities like to hold on to that identity, and sometimes they don't want to co-op with the school down the street. But what's your take on that? How do we get these low number programs sustainable and keeping them alive?
Well, you really have to help your neighboring communities if you're an opponent, and grant them their wishes with a 6-man game at times when they are struggling, so that like we just said there, that the kids can play and live out their dreams, and the programs stay alive and their communities stay alive and active in fall football, the sport of fall football. And it's a great opportunity for them to just be able to continue to be on the field. And how do you take care of those guys? The first suggestion really is a co-op of some sort, but that identity is very hard to let go, very hard. And so it's a matter of what the community kind of can decide on and agree with the neighboring schools.
Yeah, I'm from Montana originally, and that not only do they have 6-man football, they have a lot of co-ops as well. In fact, Drummond and Phillipsburg, who hated each other strongly, they're now a co-op and they played together. Up in northern Montana, Geraldine and Highwood, where they battled for multiple state championships year after year. They had to form a co-op. They famously called themselves the Rivals, and they were a pretty successful co-op. And so I guess where I'm coming from in Montana, it's more common for schools to co-op, because they say there, we would rather play. And even if we have to play with, these guys that we don't like too much, we'd rather have the ability to play than get 2 games in and have to cancel the season.
When Midvale and Cambridge came together to form Tri-Valley several years ago, it was not exactly met with universal enthusiasm on the two sides. Let's put it that way. They've grown to appreciate it, obviously. And Brandon, like you're saying, I'm sure they'd much rather, be playing alongside those guys than not playing at all. But, some of the past players and past coaches that I've talked to say they're still old timers in Cambridge that kind of grit their teeth about having to play on the same team as Midvale and vice versa. The thing that makes this 6-man versus co-op conversation so interesting for me is the geography of Idaho is just so, I don't think people can truly appreciate, you're looking at a team in a classification of Kootenai up by Coeur d'Alene playing in the same division as Clark County or Chauvin or someone like that. And just the immense headaches, logistical headaches in creating a schedule, travel and all that stuff. And then from the flip side of the coin, co-ops, another side that has come up multiple times before. And the example I'll use is Mullen St. Regis. I once asked Stetson Spooner, the head coach and athletic director, why not go 8 miles down the road to Wallace? And he says, because if we did that, we'd have to compete as a 2A school. The combined enrollment would push us up, and we'd have to play 11-man, against the likes of, St. Mary's. And that wasn't something that they were really willing to do. So that's another thing to consider here, is the enrollment of some of these things. And that's why Greenleaf, Centennial Baptist, and Gem State are competing as a 1A Division I, even though all 3 of them are somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 kids. The 3 of them put together were still below that. They were still a 1A Division I school size in terms of the 3 of them put together. So you balance it, and it's easy for me to say from here. I would like to see someone put forth a good idea on a 6-man division instead of teams walk that tightrope every single year. As Brandon, you've been with Idaho Sports now for 3 years?
Yeah.
And I think every year Chauvin has intended to have a team to the point where they're on schedules, but then when push comes to shove, they just don't have enough kids. And that's not Chauvin's fault. You only have so many kids to draw from. But if you only needed 6, could you do it? Maybe, maybe not. I would like to see if somebody could put together some sort of a legitimate, here's how it would work. here's what it would look like, and here's how it would benefit some of these smaller communities.
Yeah, and Coach Kirkland, I want to ask you kind of just philosophically, 8-man versus 6-man. It's way different. 11-man versus 8-man is different, but there's enough similarities where you can still run off tackle or off guard. But in 6-man, you've got a center, and at least in Montana, you've got a center. He snaps the ball and he can go run into the pattern if he wants to. He can go be a receiver. Also in 6-man in Montana, as you take the snap, you can't just run with it. You have to hand it off first. So you can't have a Cody Power from Dietrich just take the snap and run. Somebody's got to hand him the ball first. But stylistically, there's a big difference between 8-man and 6-man football, right?
Yes, there is a comment on that, and I want to bounce back to a few comments on co-ops.
Sure.
When there were some 6-man going on in the state back in 2013, 14, when Camas and Clark County were rolling with that idea, I called Tim Perigo. He was on the board from Minico, a good friend, and I said, "What's going on here? Why are you supporting this?" And he gave the greatest answer. He's like, "Well, kids need to play football, Coach," and that's all it was. Kids need to be playing football, and I grew to understand that and appreciate that, which is a true statement. Back to the co-op thing, I know it's hard to bite the bullet between one community to another to join together, but many of those co-ops have become extremely successful, very successful, even in recent years. You mentioned Phillipsburg and Drummond. I talked to Coach Cutler. I think they won 2, and we're for the 3rd championship over there in Montana. You go back to the Tri-Valley of 2017. That was a second place team that we competed against. New Meadows and Salmon River in 12 and 13, even though Vander Esch did everything, that put 29 kids on the sideline, which was a huge boost. 2016, Camas and Richfield co-oping. Those guys were beasts and monsters and in the playoffs and took care of North Gym in a surprise early playoff game and were tough. And then lately, Mullen St. Regis having some great success. So communities, I think, sometimes need to take a bite of that humble pie and go, we want to be successful as well. And it's okay to become the rival team or whatever you want to call yourselves. And maybe we can just go with this and build a core relationship between our communities, and our boys will have a whole bunch of success. Whereas we might just have a little 6-man game here and there. That's my thoughts on some of those things.
Yeah, I agree with you, Coach. I think it's a lot easier to go to co-op, right? 6-man logistically is a little more difficult. Might have more of a long-term viability, right? Co-ops can dissolve and come together as schools need them. And you listed off a ton of great examples there. To me, the co-op thing is simple. If it's the choice between having a team and playing a season or not, I'm going to open the door that allows me to play.
Right.
But again, Will, I have just kind of through back channels and stuff, it seems like there is a lot of resistance to that idea.
Yeah, there are. I've talked to a number of coaches. Coach McIlvain up in New Meadows last year, he was one who was telling me he was a big advocate. He was a big proponent of 6-man because he said just based on where we are, the odds of us ever having a big enough school to really support an 8-man, let alone an 11-man team, he goes, it's just not very good. But at the same time, if we try and co-op with Salmon River, it's 50 miles away. If we go to McCall, the kids basically get, patted on the head and told to go to the side and don't get hurt. And I'm putting words in his mouth, but that was kind of the gist of it, is for my kids to have the best experience. I feel like 6-man is the best thing. And the problem that I have with it, and problem is the wrong word, I just don't know how it works layout wise, because there are communities that are just resistant to going down to 6-man. And if you can't get the Timberline from Weippe and the Cascades and the Salmon Rivers, and if you can't get some of those teams willing to get on board, I just don't know that you ever have enough teams to make it viable.
Yeah, you have to have willing participants for sure. And that happens in Montana too. There's some schools that straddle that 8-man, 6-man line, and they're like, it'll be a cold day and where where I play 6-man football, Coach Kirkland. There is a pride of 8-man football, especially in a state like Idaho that's never had 6-man football before.
And just a comment on that, back in 04, when those 5 11-man teams dropped to 8-man, which would be Mackey, Hagerman, Oakley, Murtaugh, and Rimrock, I believe was the other one.
I think you're right. Yeah.
There was some pretty serious pushback there. I was right in the middle of that, and no way were those communities going to drop and play 8-man football. Oakley, in particular, Coach Cook and I, Lee Cook, got invited to Oakley in 03, summer of 03, to introduce a little 8-man football to the kids and the parents, and say this, it's okay. It's still football, kind of like we're talking about here with 6-man. But that 11-man tradition was thick in those schools, and there's definitely some pushback. But here we are, almost 20 years later, in 2 divisions, and playing good 8-man ball.
Yeah, and it's not a competitive problem, right? You see a lot of times where we're just not competitive, so we're going to petition down a level, or it truly is a numbers problem where North Gem's a good team, but they've only got 9 players. Same with Salmon River. They've got good athletes, but they're just not big enough, Will. It truly is a body count problem. It's not a competitive problem. It's
yeah. And some of those years, Coach Kirkland, you mentioned the years that they co-opt some with the New Meadows team. There were a couple of years that they went it alone in Salmon River, and they went to the state championship with 11 kids, 12 kids. And that's hard. And it doesn't matter. It can be a Division I school. It can be a Division II school. That doesn't really matter, but it is a numbers thing. You can have 6 of the best players in the state of Idaho, and unless you find at least 2 more, you're not even getting on the field to play. And that makes it tough. I know some folks who said, hey, man, that Clark County team last year, when they brought it back and played, a couple of coaches over in Eastern Idaho that I talked to said, if they just had more kids, they've got 2 or 3 kids that have serious dude potential. There's just not enough of them to sustain a healthy program long term.
Yeah, and I think the last thing to consider, and maybe we'll dive into this more in the off season, but first, if 6-man football was a thing that was available, would we see more schools try to play? I think of like a Ledor, which is pretty consistently one of the smallest schools in Idaho, but they've got good athletes in the school. They run cross country because the football is not an option. Do we see more of these private schools? Like a Genesis Prep up here in North Idaho, or over in the Treasure Valley? Will, there's tons of private and charter schools that don't play football. Coach Kirkland, do you think we would see more schools like that come out of the woodworks if you only had to put 6 guys on the field instead of 8?
Once again, it's a community pride thing. The numbers would be there, 8 and the 10s, athletes would show up. I think if someone really organized it and got it going, we would have to develop those pods we talked about last week in those areas, and it could possibly happen. And it would be a positive thing for those communities, and maybe get them started and attract the rest of the boys in the school to start throwing in and say, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'll join next year. How about a t-shirt? Maybe they'll get to 12 and 14 eventually. It's got to start somewhere.
Yeah. And that's the nail on the head right there. It all starts with good leadership and drumming up enthusiasm, and getting those kids out for the great game of football. So yeah, I don't know. Interesting food for thought. I thought this was a good time to talk about it, especially with the news of the Greenleaf Wilder merger, corporate merger, if you will, happening. So I don't know, good food for thought. Let's preview what's coming up this weekend though, fellas, because we've got some really good matchups. And again, IdahoSports.com is going to have, a couple of really juicy matchups, starting up in the White Pine League, where we've got Logos still undefeated, 4-0 overall, 2-0 in league play. They're going to be hosting Lapway, Will, and Lapway went to Clearwater Valley last week and really ran up the point total. Elias, you're out, balled out. I was pretty surprised by the final margin of victory for Lapway.
Yeah, Clearwater Valley's a little bit beat up right now. A couple players didn't play last week due to injuries. Not sure if the that's a long-term thing, or they were just out last week. But you take a couple key pieces out of the puzzle, and it's a little bit harder to get things done, especially against a team like Lapwai, which, as usual, is loaded with athletes. And you mentioned Year Out. What an all-around game that young man had. And, when you've got a couple of guys around, they've got a freshman quarterback, and when you've got a handful of players around that freshman quarterback that can take some of the pressure off, good things can happen. And so for them to go get that win against Clearwater, build some momentum, I guarantee you they're going to come into that Logos game feeling pretty good about themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at the scoreboard in the fourth quarter saying, hey, this is anybody's ball game.
Yeah, Lapwai's 2-1 on the season, Coach, and we know what kind of basketball power Lapwai has been in the past. To me, it's kind of cool to see there he went. Okay, I think that was it.
0%.
Yep, that was it. We lost. We lost Coach Kirkland there. That's all right.
We could have finished up the last few minutes in.
Hey, that's all good. We got his thoughts on all the important stuff, the 6-man and the co-ops. And
he had some great stuff there too. Some of that. And you don't really think about some of those co-ops that aren't necessarily named, Mullen, St. Regis, but some of those teams that kind of fold in together. And he had some great info there. I mean, the one that he didn't mention, I was waiting to see if he would, was Lost Rivers, when Butte County and Mackey, and they went to the state championship game. And there are several people in Mackey that said, that team was not getting to the state championship without those Mackey kids. It wasn't like all the Butte County kids and there's a couple Mackey kids over on the side. There are people saying, hey, those were some pretty good Mackey kids that came over there. So he had some great insight there, and I'm glad he was able to hang on at least that long.
Yes. And one last thing about the co-ops, the two schools that co-op like it because it gives their kids a chance. I think pretty universally, everybody else in their conference hates it. Because they're like, how is this fair?
Yeah. There's that question. And you talked about being from Montana, where there are co-ops everywhere. I'm an Eastern Washington guy. So, Garfield, Palouse, St. John, Endicott, Elmira, Cooley, Heartline, go up and down the list of all those. It's B in Washington, all those B programs that co-op. And, it's adapt or die, right? You really have very few options if you keep trying to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And this applies beyond the co-op thing. You were talking about Clark Fork. You're expecting a track meet. Their coaching staff knew that they had to simplify. Okay. I'm sure they would have liked to have just dropped back and went wild, but they knew that probably wasn't in their best interest in that particular matchup. So the willingness to adapt, the willingness to change, especially in our smaller communities, is that's what's going to keep that heart beating,
Yeah, I think that you just came up with the podcast title, Adapt or Die. I like it. That'll be good. Okay, back to
time I did one. It's usually you or Coach Kirkland. It's never me.
Yeah, we'll give you a little love tonight,
yes.
Will.
Nice.
So yes, Lapwai at Logos Friday night, 7:00 Pacific time on IdahoSports.com from Moscow. Should be a really interesting measuring stick test. Potlatch, meanwhile, is playing Troy, and if both Logos and Potlatch get through this week unscathed, Will, they meet next Friday in Potlatch in a battle of undefeated White Pine leaders.
Yeah, and that's one that I hope we have the capacity to consider doing that game, because that's one I would definitely like to, even if I'm unable to watch it live, pop into those archives on IdahoSports.com and watch that game, because Coach Ball, as usual, and his staff are doing great work at Potlatch.
Yeah, we're gonna put feelers out and see what we can do there, but that matchup looms large for sure. Kamei is still kind of lurking too, and Kamei, of course, has to play Potlatch still this year. They already lost to Logos. Kamei is going to play Clearwater Valley in the I love the name of this rivalry. Well, the Upriver Rampage is what they call it.
Those guys are separated by all of about 150 yards. Get a good 7-iron and you can hit it from school to school. And they actually compete together in some sports, be it wrestling and whatnot. So they know each other really well. And I talked to Coach Hutchins earlier this week, and he said, hey, whether we're down and they're up or vice versa, we know each other. And, there's just something about that rivalry game that brings everybody up, just that extra little pinch. And I expect that to be a pretty interesting matchup.
Yeah, that's going to be a really fun one as well up in the White Pine League. We've got another neutral site 8-man affair going on. We'll actually have back-to-back neutral site games on IdahoSports.com this week and then next week. But for this week, Will, you've got a Saturday showdown. Council is playing Butte County at Homedale High School at 5:00 Mountain Time on Saturday night. We will have that game for you on IdahoSports.com from that new turf field at Homedale. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, Council just coming off that game against Kamei last Friday where things didn't go real well for the Lumberjacks, went well for Kamei. And now their reward is to have to drive, and what would that be, about an hour and a half down the road, roughly, maybe 2 hours, and play another one of the best 1A Division I teams in the state. So Council's got their work cut out for them. They're a talented team. They're a strong team, but so's Butte County. I mean, Butte County, I've been on that wagon since day one. I remain on that wagon. Coach Thorngren and the Pirates, I expect them to be one of the last 4 teams playing in November. Whether or not they get to that championship game, I don't know, but I expect them to be in the semifinals. You get down on that turf field under the lights Saturday night when it's kind of like being Monday Night Football. You know what I mean? If you're a high school football fan in Idaho, that's the game you're going to be watching. And I think it's a good opportunity for Butte County to showcase their depth, their versatility, and just their overall talent.
Yeah, this is again Saturday night, 5 p.m. Mountain. So in terms of viewership, I mean, window-wise, there's not much else going on. So, yeah, why not tune in and check out a little Saturday night action on IdahoSports.com. And, I got to give Andy Glenn, I think he's in his 3rd or 4th year coaching Council. I got to give him a lot of credit for putting together a very rigorous schedule. Council's Council could get through this regular season and be like, I don't know, 6-3. And maybe people that just look at the records go, oh, yeah, they're all right, I guess, and miss the context of they've played a lot of really good teams.
They have. And another thing I'll give him credit for is he apparently wears shorts no matter the weather. It could be 10 below zero and snowing sideways with, hurricane force winds, and he's going to be out there in his khaki shorts coaching football, from what I've heard. So I'll give him credit for that one as well. But, yeah, it's – you talk about a willingness to take on all comers, but when push comes to shove, Kendrick's done it the last couple of years. Council's doing it this year. You're seeing some teams do it. I mean, we got to play somebody. We may as well play, the big boys and see how we match up.
Yeah, don't mention bad weather in Council. That brings back bad memories of that
game last year.
Yeah, that 6-0 loss to Castleford in the quarterfinals where there was a blizzard in Council that night.
Yeah,
that was. So yes, Council, Butte County, from Homedale, Saturday night, 5:00 on IdahoSports.com. Other games of note that we're keeping an eye on here, Will. I look over at the 1A D1 District 4 Snake River Conference. You've got Raft River at Valley. This to me is almost like an elimination game where whoever loses this game is going to be behind the 8 ball and possibly could be on the outside looking in. If we're just going off of what happened last year, 5 teams from the conference got into the playoffs ultimately between auto bids and at large bids. But Raft River, not everybody can make it, right? Musical chairs, somebody's going to be left out of the dance. So this is an important game already in September for both Raft River and Valley.
Yeah, and I think more so for Raft River than for Valley, though would not help Valley's cause to lose this game. Let's put it that way. But Coach Chad Evans and the Trojans over in Malta, I think for confidence as much as anything, they need to go out and they need to have a strong showing. They've got some talent over there, Kai Ward and some of the other players in the blue and yellow. They're not a bad football team. They're down a little bit in numbers compared to what we've seen in years past, but they're tough, they're competitive, and they're going to go give it everything they've got. That's the only thing that that's a team will kind of follow the molding of its coach, and that's Chad Evans. You know what I mean? Kind of just quiet and goes about his business and works his tail off. And that's basically what his team does. And that's what they're going to have to do Friday night against a Valley team that has shown a real explosiveness with Thomas Vargas and with Hardy and with Drake Jones and some of the other players we've talked about. Is this is a team that can hit some home runs. They've given up a few home runs as well, which I'm sure head coach Brian Ayers would like to limit on Friday night and going forward as well. But I think you're right. I think the team that wins this game puts themselves in a good position, not a great position, not a perfect position. You're not reserving the bus for that first round of the playoffs just yet. But the team that loses, and I would think, especially if that team is Raft River, you've put yourself in a very precarious situation as far as advancing.
See, Raft River to me is almost like Lighthouse has been the past couple of years, Will, where they just had such a rigorous schedule early that yes, okay, they're 0-4, they're 0-5, they're 0-6, but then the soft part of the schedule comes at the end, the as soft as it can get in the Snake River.
Well, yeah, it's not Oakley. No, it's not Lighthouse Christian. No, and you're exactly right, and that's why it's important when you have a chance to get a win. You need to get that win, because at some point, whether you're, there, and we don't know the mathematical equation, and we can beat that horse. It's dead and gone. We're never going to know the equation, but there's a pretty big difference between 2 and 6 and 3 and 5. And so if you have a chance to get what would be down the line, that third win or that fourth win, you got to capitalize.
Yeah, and so I think for that reason, I think this game is more important for Valley, as counterintuitive as that sounds, knowing that Valley still has at least what we think are the two big dogs this year, Oakley and Lighthouse Christian, whereas Raft River's already played them. Okay, we're done with them. So for Valley here, if they could bankroll a win against Raft River, that puts a little wind in their sails, I think, and really could get them on a good trajectory. But man, this is, and we're going to have matchups like this every single week in this conference. So.
Yep. And in multiple other conferences as well. You get up there into the 1A Division Ones, you get some of those teams behind, Logos and Potlatch, your Prairies and your Lapways and your Kamiais that are trying to slug it out to basically make sure where you're not in the shoes that you're not wearing the shoes that Prairie wore last year, where you're good enough to be there, but just the way the tree is shaking, you're the only apple left on the tree when it's all said and done. I don't know if that metaphor makes any sense whatsoever, but I hopefully you understand where I was going for, where, they were a good enough team to get there, but because of other allotments, they were the team left without a spot. And I'm sure that Coach Kane in Prairie and his kids could look at a game or two, man, I wish we would have gotten that game, or I wish we would have gotten that game. Maybe it flips the coin. So you're right. In District 4 and in District 2, I think every week there's going to be one or two of these games going forward where the winner is going to walk away saying, okay, good, I'm glad we got that one. And the loser is going to have their eye on it on the schedule going, oh, man, if only we had gotten that one.
Yeah, and the White Pine only got 3 teams into the playoffs last year: Kamiai, Clearwater Valley, Lapway. That might happen again. So you really have to make sure you secure one of those 2 auto bids and don't leave it up to the at-large chances, because between District 4 and District 2, I'm just saying it right now, there's going to be a good team or several good teams,
or 2 or 3. You're exactly right. I'm a baseball coach, and I can't tell you how many times I've had kids walk back to the dugout after they thought, a borderline pitch was called against them. And I just tell them, don't leave it in the umpire's hands. Go up there ready to hit. Don't leave it up to him as to whether or not you're on first or you're back in the dugout. And this would be similar. The best advice in the world to any of these teams, be it Murtaugh, be it Valley, be it, Troy, whoever, win.
Yeah,
win, and it'll sort itself out.
It's already getting late for some teams, which is tough. And so we're talking about this because for the second year in a row, District 3, the Western Idaho Conference, is going to get 2 bids to the playoffs, which is now a 4-team league with notice.
That's where I don't want to say it looks bad, because no one could have foreseen this particular sequence of events coming up. But you're right. 2 teams guaranteed to get in. Notice, I don't want to call anyone a lock. I don't want to put it in ink until they've actually qualified, but they look to be in tremendous shape. Two of the other teams have had to combine to finish their season. Idaho City has struggled. Idaho City, we're recording this on Thursday night. Idaho City and the Wilder Greenleaf Co-op are playing right now. They're probably at about halftime of their game as we speak. And then you've got Rimrock, a team that, according to sources that I've talked to, they're having some numbers issues as well. Like, they're okay right now, but you sprain a couple ankles and we may be postponing some games there. And two of those teams are going to get into the playoffs. And then you look at the possibility of, let's use Prairie again. Let's say Prairie finishes 5-3, and you're looking at possibly, say, a 2-win Rimrock team that gets into the playoffs instead of a 5-win team out of the White Pine. That's where the back and forth comes from. That's where the frustration comes from. That's where the anger comes from among fan bases and the confusion among coaches. And we obviously have not yet found that, you kind of got to find that narrow line that you can kind of walk that tightrope. And we obviously have not found it yet.
Yeah, because you look at the number of bids and number of teams. District 4's got 7 teams. They get 2 bids. The White Pine League's got 8 teams. They get 2 bids. I guess you could say, I could hear the argument, okay, District 3's got 5 teams. We should get 2 bids. But, man, 2 out of 4 versus 2 out of 8 and 2 out of 7. Yeah, that's tough. But, again, nobody could have foreseen this happening. And so now I guess the head-to-head results are important, but I'm also kind of gauging how everybody does against Notice to try and figure out, okay, can one of these teams go somewhere in the first round of the playoffs and maybe put a scare into a team? Because we think Notice is pretty good. So I want to see how do these teams compete against Notice, and Rimrock gets the first crack at it Friday.
Yep. Yeah, and Rimrock, we know with Gomez, we mentioned earlier, he's a heck of an athlete. So we know that there are a couple of playmakers down there wearing Raider uniforms. It's just a matter of if they're healthy, if they've got their full deck of cards to play with, to compete with in that game. And if they do, I don't see any reason why they can't hang around, and make it fun. Let's give people a reason to stick around after halftime, as the old joke goes. I think it's possible. Idaho City, I'm curious to hear how things go tonight with them and the Wilder Greenleaf Co-op. Coach Rober up there, I know that there were some people expecting some good things out of his squad, and so far they just haven't found their footing yet. But, I mean, how many times have we seen it, Brandon? I mean, last year, Lighthouse Christian starts 0-5, wins 2 out of their last 3, and they wind up going into the playoffs, and they didn't exactly get laughed out of the playoffs. You know what I mean? So get right at the hot time. As a wise man once told me, I would rather be the ugliest girl invited to the dance rather than the prettiest girl left sitting at home.
That's right. That's a good way to put it. And then at the 1A D2 level this week, the Long Pin Conference, Tri-Valley is a team I'm kind of interested in. I misspoke last week. I said their quarterback, Jace Wagner, was a freshman. He's a sophomore. I don't want to.
Man.
I had a Tri-Valley fan write in and let me know, hey, I appreciate that. So, but they've got a bye week, and then they play Council next week. That's going to be a big game, and we'll talk more about that next week. Garden Valley was going to play Cascade, and I thought this could be interesting, but Cascade now running into low numbers because of injuries, and so they've moved that game to October, Will.
I'm glad to hear they were able to find a date to play that and not just wipe it off the books.
Well, and I got to double check because Cascade originally that week was scheduled to play Wilder on Friday, October 13th. They're now playing Garden Valley on Wednesday, October 11th. So I got to assume they dropped the Wilder game, but I don't
that would be my assumption, because Wilder, based on their co-op with Gem State Academy, which is a Seventh-day Adventist school, they can't play on Fridays. Yeah. So that game would have to be moved up. And since it was a non-conference, my bet is the 2 athletic directors, Wilder and Cascade, got together and said, hey, let's just wipe this one off the book. You can get your conference game filled in there, and they can, Wilder Greenleaf can have a bye week, or maybe they can see if they can find another game, because they're, there are teams that are out there that may be willing to step in at a moment's notice. I heard there was one up in North Idaho. Kootenai had to cancel, and I forget. Wallace. Kootenai was going to play Wallace. That game has been canceled, and Wallace picked up the team from Montana that was on a bye week that said, yeah, we'll come over and play.
Yeah, interesting.
Maybe Wallace is going over there and playing. I'm not sure, but there's a possibility that something could happen.
Yeah, for sure. The big game of the week to me at the 1A D2 level is in the Sawtooth Conference, District 4, Dietrich at Hagerman. Okay, we've been talking Hagerman up. Are the Pirates for real? Wyatt Mavencamp is back off of his injury, back quarterbacking the Pirates. This is their opportunity to say, yep, we're here and we've arrived.
Yeah, and it didn't go well for him last week. But now if you got Mavencamp back in the mix and you've got a week under your belts and everybody's practiced and everybody's ready to go, I like this Dietrich team. I think that you got Camas County, I think, is pretty clearly the number one, though I'm sure Dietrich's saying, hey, wait a second. But Dietrich trying to get in there into that B, that second position. And the dogfight is really going to be for C, that number 3 spot. And this, on paper, these two teams are in that mix. Castleford's going to be in that mix. So what happens on Friday between these two teams is obviously going to go a long way in determining who winds up on what line when the 1A Division II playoff bracket is formalized in a few weeks.
Yeah, and I think if we're being honest, there's 4 teams in there: Dietrich, Castleford, Camas County, and Hagerman. I think are all should be in the playoffs. Only 3 will get to go. I would venture to say that all 4 of those teams could finish at least second place over in
potentially. Yeah, depending on how. Yeah, depend. Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped in. I assumed I knew what you were going to say. Go ahead and finish.
Yeah, over in District 5-6, the Rocky Mountain Conference, which has got Rockland and North Gem and Water Springs and Mackey. And I only say that because outside of Rockland, they've cleaned up against the other teams from the Rocky Mountain Conference in those non-conference matchups so far.
Yeah, yeah. And Coach Hunter, in talking to him earlier this week, look at me name dropping everywhere. He said they're starting to find their footing a little bit, and they played much better the last couple of weeks as opposed to the first couple of weeks. And you get to that North Gem game coming up in a couple of weeks, and there's still, you talk about rivalry games. You never know. North Gem has some kids that can play. They just don't have very many kids. And I've also had a couple of coaches tell me, hey, don't completely go to bed on Mackey. It's interesting. I think the odds are stacked against them schedule-wise and whatnot. But, they've got Riker Esplin. They've got Palin Bruley. They've got some kids that can play there. And if you walk in there and you take them lightly, they might jump up and they might bite somebody. So, but your point is well taken. You take, say, Hagerman out of District 4 and you drop them into that 5-6. Are they in a better position to make the playoffs? I think they probably are.
Yeah. So Hagerman will host Dietrich on Friday. Should be an interesting matchup there as well. But that'll do it for this edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Don't forget, on IdahoSports.com, 2 big games happening, one Friday, one Saturday. Friday night, we've got Lapway at Logos, 7:00 Pacific time. And then Saturday, neutral site game, Butte County and Council playing in Homedale Saturday night, 5 p.m. Mountain Time for that one. All right, for the coach, Lane Kirkland, and his cell phone battery, which is hopefully resting and charging somewhere. Yep. And for Will Henneke, my name is Brandon Bainey. Enjoy the competitions, everybody. We'll see you next week for another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.